attention for a moment. The candidates are going to come in, have their photograph taken, which has now become a sort of obligatory part of this hustings, and then we'll get...
Hey, Donna. Okay.
Fall off the stage.
It's gone very quiet.
Wonderful.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, welcome to the Eden Court. I always feel this is my favourite venue for party conference. I'm sorry we're such a successful party now. We can't have our conference here. But it's great to be at Eden Court and great to have this opportunity for the candidates to lay out their stalls. I'm going to ask them in a moment, each of them, to speak for 6 minutes. They will give you their pitch, and then we'll take questions. And I'll take questions in the hall, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But I just want to set the scene by saying this is the third of the party hustings that we've had. I'm not trying to make you emulate the other two, but the other two have been positive, forward-looking, good fun, and everybody has enjoyed them. And I'm sure at the end, well, everybody but the candidates have enjoyed them. And I'm sure that you will enjoy them too. So that's the aim that I have, that we should do this as members of the SNP family. Sometimes a slightly dysfunctional family, but a family nonetheless. So with that, and further ado, they have drawn lots for speaking order, and the first person to speak is Ash.
Well, hello everyone, and thank you very much for coming out to listen to us all talk to you today about Scotland's future. And it's really good to be back in the Highlands. I recently got engaged to a Highlander, so I'm certainly spending a lot more time up here than I had before, and I'm really starting to love the place. So it's great to be back. So I want to take you back to September the 19th, that morning in 2014. And ask you to think about how you felt. And I'll tell you how I felt about that, which was I was absolutely devastated. And it was so bad, I didn't actually even want to leave the house that day. I didn't want to look at any of my neighbours. I didn't want to go out at all. And I'm someone that's had, I'm sure like many people, a personal experience of grief. And I felt that I recognized that feeling that we all felt on that morning was that we were grieving. We were grieving for that loss of the Scotland that we'd hoped for and that we'd worked for and that we didn't have anymore that morning when we woke up. So I don't want us to feel like that anymore, and I want us to work full speed towards independence so that we never, ever have to feel like that again. Now, I was full-time working in the Yes campaign in the summer in the run-up to that vote. And what I saw there and what I experienced during that time, it really stayed with me over those years. And I just want to share a little bit. I mean, some of you probably were involved in that yourselves, but I'll share a little bit about that with you now. So what I saw then was a new confidence, I think, in being Scottish, a creativity that was flourishing. I met 16-year-old after 16-year-old. You know, many of them were like covered in Yes badges, and they were almost jumping up and down with excitement at the thought of casting their first vote for Scottish independence. And also, every cafe that I walked into, you know, if I walked in to get a coffee, every single table that I walked past, they were all involved in talking about things to do with Scottish independence and statehood. And they were doing it in a very confident way. You know, they were talking about complicated things like currency unions and pension arrangements, and they were doing it, and they were enjoying talking about it, I think. And also, all the people that were working together. So it's people from no party and people from lots of different parties that were all working together for the betterment of Scotland. And it was great to see. And that is the kind of Scotland that I think we want. That's the Scotland that we want to have us all working together for a better Scotland. So I think at the moment, I feel like we're in a position where we're treading water. And I think we've been treading water for quite some time now. And I think the position that we're in is if we keep treading water, we all know what that's like if you're out in the deep sea and you're treading water for a long time, eventually you're going to get tired and you're going to get swept away by the next tide that comes along. So I don't think we can afford to do that. And I think we need to change the direction that we're going in, and we need to do things differently, and we need to take action. So what I'm proposing is that we relight the fires of the Yes campaign right across the country, get back to where we were before. I'm proposing that we lead and we inspire the wider movement. And I'm proposing that we need to heal the rifts that we have in our own party right now, because we need to speak as one, because that is the way that we're going to convince the people of Scotland that we've got what it takes, that we can be an independent country, and that we will be successful when we get there. So I think we need to change direction. I'll just be honest with you right now. I think we need to change direction. What we have been doing, begging for referendums that are never going to come, is not going to work for us anymore. We need to adapt to the situation that we're in now. We need to respond to that. The time is now. We need to change. So I'm your candidate for change. I'm the person that's going to move us on to the next stage here. So my plan is that I'll set up an independence convention. So I'll do that right at the beginning, day one. So that's going to bring together the whole of the wider movement. I'm also going to instruct the creation of an independence commission. So you might not have heard anyone talking about that before, but this is a body that's going to be tasked with setting up all the infrastructure and the planning that we're going to need in order to get Scotland ready to become an independent country. And when the people of Scotland can see that we're ready, that's going to give them the confidence to then vote for that. As First Minister, I think the important thing is good governance. So I'm going to focus on the priorities of the people of Scotland. So that is things like the NHS, that is things like our schools, businesses, the environment, the cost of living crisis, and so on. I'm going to put the best people in the best jobs. I'm going to give them their head so they can just go and do what they need to do. And I'm going to task them with delivering for the people of Scotland. And I'm going to be all about transparency and accountability as well, because I think that's really important. And that good governance is how we build trust. And with trust, that is how we progress people towards self-determination. And with regard to independence, I propose that we take control of this process ourselves. So we give the power to make this decision back to the people of Scotland. So we take it away from Westminster, we stop asking for referendums, we give it back to the people of Scotland, and they will decide when they are ready and when it is time for us to have independence. And so my final message to you, that if you choose me to be your leader, I promise that I'll be bold, that I'll be courageous, I'll make the hard decisions, I'll do the tough things that we need to do in order to get us ready for independence. And I will be absolutely relentless until we get to the point, finally, where Scotland's future is in Scotland's hands.
And now Humza.
Feskerma, good afternoon. It's about as far as my Gaelic will go. Forgive me. There is a more eloquent Gaelic speaker, I think, on this panel. But good afternoon to you all. Thank you for such a warm welcome to the Highlands. It is great to be back in the Eden Court Theatre. I think one of my first party conferences when I joined this party was at the Eden Court Theatre. And it made me think of a stalwart of our movement who's no longer with us. A mentor of mine, the late and the great Bashir Ahmad, the very first non-white, first ethnic minority MSP in the Scottish Parliament, a good friend of many of us who are here. And he came to this country in the 1960s from the Punjab of Pakistan, Punjab of India actually at the time. He came over here in the 1960s and became a bus conductor in Glasgow. And I don't think for a minute he could have thought, as he was collecting and stamping the tickets in the Glasgow Bus Corporation, that just a couple of generations on, somebody that he knew, and he was a good family friend of ours, could be in contention to be the next First Minister of Scotland. And I say that just because I think it's always good to start with a bit of hope, because there's too much negativity in our world, and we switch on the news. We should be really proud. Proud as a party, but also proud as a nation, that actually somebody's race isn't a barrier to get to potentially the top job in the country. I think that's something we should all be really, really proud of. I also wanted to start by paying tributes and talking about stalwarts. Paying tribute to both Nicola Sturgeon and John Swinney. There will be lots of time and lots of words that will be said about their contribution to our country, to our party, to our movement. But if John Swinney and Nicola Sturgeon were to do nothing more, but by the way, they will still very much be involved, I suspect, but if they were to do nothing more, then their names will go down in history as being two of the most pivotal contributors, members, pillars of our independence movement. So I want to pay tribute and thank them for all that they have done to get us to this very place. And I want to say as much love and respect I have for both John and for Nicola. We have an opportunity to set a new course, but also to build on their legacy. And every single person in this room, the one thing that unites us is that desire, that urgency, the need to bring independence to our nation. And I see it day in and day out in the job that I do. I mean, what has the union dividend delivered for us? It's delivered for us a Tory cost of living crisis, where in 2023, people can't afford the basic necessities. It means we've got a Tory Prime Minister who extols the virtues of that special Northern Ireland Protocol while denying us the same very rights. It means that we have nuclear weapons on our shores, billions of pounds, while our people go hungry. It means that we have fuel poverty, especially in rural Scotland, fuel poverty in a country that's energy rich. It means that we've got a Tory government that is desperate to undermine our democracy time after time after time again. And I didn't get into politics, and I expect my friends didn't get into politics to tinker around the edges, to just mitigate Westminster's cruelty. We got into independence. I got into politics because I want to unleash this country's potential. And we can only do that through independence. And yes, we should point out Westminster's failings. But if we want to gain our independence, if we want to inspire people, we need to give them a vision to vote for. We need to get them to vote for independence, not just because they're holding their nose against the cruelty of Westminster. And I want to give you a taste of that vision. My vision for independence is one where we don't just reduce poverty, but we eradicate poverty. And my vision for independence is that every single child in Scotland has the opportunities my girls have, regardless of where you live or what your background is. That every child of Scotland has the best start in life. My vision for independence is that we unleash the economic potential of this country, not with two hands tied behind our back and blindfolded because of a Westminster austerity agenda. That we unleash the economic potential of this country for a well-being economy, an economy that works for the people, not the other way round. So how do we get there? Well, first of all, I hope I can demonstrate that I've got the experience. I've had some of the toughest jobs in government, transport, justice, and health, and delivered in each of them. Transport, really pleased to deliver road improvements, including, of course, laying the groundwork for Berrydale Braes. I was pleased to do that in my time as Transport Secretary. And justice, extending protections for domestic abuse workers, announcing a pardon for minors who were convicted of the miners' strike in 1984-85. And as Health Secretary, delighted to have rolled out the fastest COVID booster programme in the entire UK, one of the fastest actually in the entire world. And while there's still challenges with the NHS, I'll be the absolute first to admit that. How much more difficult would those challenges have been if we had nurses and ambulance staff going on strike? Scotland, the only part of the UK where they didn't go on strike. Not by chance, not by good fortune, but because I was able to reach out, cross the divide, find compromise where necessary. And if I was leader of this party that I love, leader of the country, that is how I would govern, to reach across that divide, find compromises where I possibly can, and hopefully govern fairly in the interests of this country. I'll end by saying this, that there is an urgency to get our independence. On day one, if I was leader, I would instruct headquarters to restart that campaign, the Yes campaign, that Yes movement, that civic-led campaign, because it is you, the membership, it is the people that will win us our independence. The second thing I would do is ensure that within the first week that we start our regional assemblies across the country, so that you, the membership, can tell us how, determine our path for the future, and we will act on your collective mandate. I will end on simply saying this, that be in no doubt that any election we fight, every election we fight under my leadership will be on the issue of independence, including the next general election. So I hope that you will put your trust in me. I'm looking forward to a really great debate. But we need our independence, and it needs a leader who can inspire, grow our movement, and bring people towards the cause of independence. I look forward to the discussion.
Wel, ffeis gyrma, agos mae'r ffeiching yn dŵ yn Inverness, agos ffael to creo ieif ule. Friends, it's wonderful to see you and to see so many familiar faces and to pay tribute. I think the fact that we've got some friends from the Northern Isles, we've got some friends from the West Coast, and it's been my delight and privilege to campaign beside you, so many of you, over the last few years. And this election contest is really about one thing. It's about independence. It's about who is best equipped to deliver independence and who has the best plan to get us there. But it's also about the kind of society that we want Scotland to be, the kind of Highland communities that we want to live in. Places where equality of opportunity is the birthright of every child. Places where tolerance is the ruling ethic. Places where poverty becomes history. Because I don't know about you, but for me, independence is a means to an end. It's not an end in itself. It's an end to poverty, an end to the fact that in Scotland today, 1 in 4 children live in poverty. In a world where, surrounded by fields and plentiful supplies of food, kids go to bed hungry. In a part of the world where we know more than anyone else that there's enough renewable energy and oil and gas to fuel our energy needs, kids go to bed cold. And independence for me is urgent because I think the fact that so many kids are in poverty should unite all of us in outrage and in a commitment to end this once and for all. The stakes are high, time is of the essence, and we need a plan that will deliver independence. Because yes, we can make progress when it comes to devolution. I've delivered 3 budgets over the last few years that have put fairness at its heart. But it can only go so far. Independence must be delivered to end that. Back in the 70s, before I was born, but perhaps some of you remember those days, my family started some of the first branches of the SNP locally, just down the road in Far. And back then, there were very few people that turned up to meetings, very few people that campaigned, very few people who believed. The Scottish Parliament was still in the dim and distant future. And yet their hard work paved the way for my generation to think that independence was normal and to start ruling our own affairs. Back home in Dingwall just now, there's a wee 6-month baby with 2 front teeth and chubby hands. And I look at her and think the stakes are high because I want her to grow up in a free, sovereign, independent country. And those stakes mean that we need to ask ourselves this question. In this contest, who do our opponents fear the most? Which leader can reach out and convince those who are yet to be persuaded of independence to vote for independence? Because the SNP has always been at its strongest. When we took on the establishment together, we didn't back down and we won. And that is the steely commitment that we need once again, to work together as a team, to recognise that we need to convince others and to ensure that we never back down and we focus on that victory for the sake of the next generation, that victory for the sake of kids in poverty, that victory for our Highland and Island communities. And over the last few years, I've campaigned with so many of you to ensure that we won elections in Skye, Lochaber and Badenoch, both times with an increased share of the vote. I've also delivered budgets and worked as Scotland's finance minister, facing down the UK government, entering into negotiations and ensuring that we always left with as much of a victory as possible. And so that approach is the approach that I'm basing my candidacy on, because continuity won't cut it. Here's the thing. If we keep doing the same thing, we'll get the same results. So if we want to do things differently, we need to reset and we need to do things differently. And over the next few years, my commitment would be threefold. First of all, we need to ensure that we focus on good government, because that is a way of convincing people, ensuring that our economy is prospering and growing, we're reinvesting in the NHS, and that we are ending poverty. And good government isn't just important for the sake of our communities, it's also important because it convinces others of what we are capable of. But the second thing and the most important thing is team. Team first and team last. We've got over 100,000 members. We reflect the diversity of the Scottish economy. We've got Islanders and Highlanders here. We've got farmers, we've got academics, we've got plumbers, we've got people that are coming into contact with people, other citizens, perhaps some of them who voted no on a daily basis. You need to be the ones that we empower, not just to build the policies that we need, but actually to reach out to people as we've been doing over the last few decades. That's how we've shifted the dial on independence, and that's how we'll continue to shift the dial. It needs to start with branches, it needs to start with activists, not with the leaders. And the last thing, and perhaps the most important thing, is to focus on how we shift the dial of support for independence. And my approach is to set out an independence delivery plan, built from the grassroots up, focusing on the first 10 years of an independent Scotland, on how we ensure that we are wealthier, we are fairer, we are greener. Because if comparator countries out there, without the inherent advantages that Scotland have, are wealthier, fairer and greener, then tell me this, why can't Scotland be? It's often put to me that Scotland can't afford to be independent. And I tell you this, Scotland can't afford not to be independent. Time is running out, and we need to set out our image, our vision, our clear mission of ensuring that we use Scotland's potential, use the talent, the ingenuity, the background of all communities in Scotland to build that case for the future, and that is through an independence delivery plan. So I finish where I started, which is this. Independence is coming. In the 70s, you believed, many of you believed and you worked, whether it was with big crowds or small crowds, and you paved the way. All of us in this room have a job now to pave the way for the next generation. So our kids and our children's children grow up in a free, secure, sovereign, independent country where, yes, poverty is history, but it won't happen by accident. It needs change, and it needs a leader that our opponents fear, because she ain't going to back down. Thanks.
Thank you, and thank each of the candidates for giving their vision. We're going to start having the questions now. I wonder if those people who are in charge of the lighting could just bring the lighting up in the hall a little, because it's almost impossible to see the back of this hall, as a result of which some people at the back who want to ask questions are going to be very disappointed people. And we'll take it out on me, no doubt. So what we want to do is just a wee bit more than that, because I can't really see at the back. Now, let me just make it clear what we're going to do. I'll ask people to put their hands up. I'll take as many questions as we can during the next hour or so. If the questions are short and the answers are short, something I've been saying each time, then we'll get lots of questions in, and we'll have lots of opportunities to reflect upon them. I want to make the point that questions should be able to be answered by all the candidates. No question just to one candidate. And to remind us, we're all fellow SNP members. We'll ask those questions and get them answered, I'm sure, with humour, with directness, and with respect. So let us start now. And that lady right in the middle was the first one with her hand up. So on you go. There's a microphone coming. And can you say who you are and what branch of constituency you're from before you start?
Hello, my name's Lindsay Johnston, and I am from the same branch as Kate, Dingwall and Black Isle. And I'm a councillor with Highland Council. The position of First Minister attracts a salary of nearly £160,000. That's far in excess of the average Scottish wage of £26,000. And Highland wages are even lower than that. I'll just put in a plea for councillors at 19.5. How will you retain perspective on the everyday life of the average Highlander? And how will you improve wages and prospects for people who want to stay in the Highlands?
Thank you. Thank you very much. And the questions start with Kate, please.
Thanks very much. Well, I recognise that point. I think it's also important that the SNP has committed to freezing the elected representatives' wages in government since 2008. But your point, I think, is critical. Because in Scotland, we have got a fundamental injustice where right now, down the road from here, there are companies that are making billions in profits using our resources. And yet workers are on low salaries, seeing inflation eating away at those salaries in and of themselves, unable to access housing, and surely there's nothing more important than warm, affordable, accessible housing. So what would I do about that? I think the first thing is that we need to recognise that Scotland has all that it takes to be economically prosperous. But that prosperity is not about making the rich richer. That prosperity is about supporting our small businesses, supporting individuals with bright ideas to set up businesses, supporting them to create well-paid, secure jobs. So you're right, in the Highlands, the average wage is lower than elsewhere. And yet, we're the ones that are powering the renewables revolution. We're the ones, I was seeing this morning a house building company that's transforming the way that we build houses using renewable sources of energy as well as using locally sourced timber. And we have got all the resources, but those resources are not translating into work opportunities. So putting fair work, fair terms and conditions, fair wages at the heart of our ambition for economic prosperity. We're on the cusp of the renewables revolution. We know that we're one of the few countries in the world that found oil, got poorer. It's not going to happen this time. We need to make sure that when it comes to renewables, for example, we are using our resources to support individuals in Scotland, access, fair wages, fair work, and that is how we also ensure that we reverse depopulation in Scotland.
Yeah.
Lindsay, my wife is a councillor too and reminds me about the wage issue should I be successful in this contest. I think it's a really actually important point because councillors, our local government team, our hundreds of SNP councillors across the country are working their backsides off and making really difficult decisions in some of the most difficult circumstances. And just a point about local government, I'll answer your question direct in just a second, but our local government colleagues, we absolutely have to make sure that we are offering a new deal to local government. We want to make sure they are part of Team SNP. We have so much talent across the party. We've got to make sure we're harnessing it. But let me answer some of your questions, if I may. How do you keep perspective? I think that's important, not just if you're First Minister, but if you're a minister more generally in government, because we are paid well, and it's right that we pay more in taxation so we can invest in our public services. But for me, that's why, if I am First Minister, I don't want to just be the First Minister. I want to be the first activist. I want to be with you community by community, town by town, city by city, doorstep by doorstep, talking to people, persuading them for the case of independence. And that keeps you grounded. If you keep yourself in an ivory tower in Edinburgh, not talking to the people, you become disconnected. And I won't ever allow that to happen. I suspect my wife who's here won't ever allow that to happen either. So I'm going to make sure that not only am I, of course, if I am lucky enough to be elected leader of the party and then the First Minister, that I'm not forgetting my obligation, because it is an obligation, to this party and driving the independence movement forward and speaking to people face to face. A couple of other points that I just wanted to make, that for me, one of the first policies I announced was a £25 million scheme to buy back empty properties and put them back into social affordable housing. Because that is needed in a lot of places in Scotland, but particularly in the Highlands and rural Scotland. And we know also the problem with second homes. So the other policy that I announced straight after that was that we should give local authorities the power to increase council tax for second homes. Because if we do that, then that money comes to you, local government, and you can reinvest that back into affordable housing. Because having these second homes dormant for months and months on end, when they could be used for key workers, for nurses, for doctors, police officers, teachers, for those key workers, we've got to make sure that housing is used for the people who need it in their local communities. And the last thing I would say is those resources that Kate eloquently spoke about, we have to make sure that the profit is coming back is being used for the people. So I've, again, announced today some further detail that in a future lease, for example, in a future ScotWind programme, we're not just leasing, but the government should be taking at least a 10% equity stake. You take that 10% equity stake, you're going to get a portion of those profits. And those profits are going to come back into the communities that deserve them. So we've got to raise everybody up. And let's always, always bring this back to independence. Because there's so much we can do, and the government should do as much as we possibly can within devolution. But imagine the difference we could make if we had powers over employment law. If we had the ability to raise the national minimum wage, then what a difference we could make to the people of Scotland. So let's make sure when we talk about finance and economy, we're talking about a well-being economy that raises everybody's quality of life.
Thank you. Ash.
Yes, First Minister's salary is very high. I don't know if everyone knows, but the SNP government obviously had a cap on that, so all SNP ministers don't draw the full salary. They're drawing the salary from the 2007 amount, so that brings it down a little bit more. And I think it's really important that you don't kind of get stuck in that bubble. I think sometimes we do see that politicians are in this sort of Hollywood bubble. They're surrounded by advisors, everybody's on a high salary, and they're not really very in touch with what's going on outside. So I think that I came into politics quite late compared to some other people. I think the public, they're getting a bit fed up with career politicians and people that haven't ever had a real job. So I have had real jobs. I've worked in the private sector. I've worked in the third sector before I came into politics in my 40s. And my first job was when I was 13, and I got a paper round, and they used to deliver me, I think it was 300 papers, and I used to get £3, so it was a penny a paper. And I used to pay my sister 50p to help me fold them up, because I also had to fold them to fit them in the bag so I could go around and deliver them. So that was my first job, and then I moved quickly on from there to selling fish and chips. So I certainly feel like I've had a varied experience of employment where I've connected in with normal people's experiences, because I feel like I have had those experiences. Now, in terms of moving on to what we need to do for the Highlands, I was up last weekend as well, and I'm kind of picking up the feeling that there's a lot of stuff going on in the Central Belt. Things are happening down there, but that sometimes you feel like a little bit like you're getting forgotten about, and that your priorities are not being taken on board by the politicians in Edinburgh. So I want you to know that I understand your priorities. I'm listening very carefully to what people are telling me up here. We're not going to have time to go into a lot of it in this answer to this question, but I think it would be things like land reform. I know that's important to communities up here who have been priced out of buying homes, and it's difficult to sustain things with the small amounts of land that are available. So I think we have done some work on that, but we need to go much further and much faster on what we're doing on that. We need to be building more homes for people, and there's different ways that we can be funding that, and they should be for rental. So a bit like the council houses of old, but under a slightly different system, so that they can't be sold on and then end up as second homes or holiday homes. Infrastructure is really important, so you'll have seen what I was saying about the road projects. That's one of my #1 priorities if I become leader, is to start work again on things like the A9 and the A96, because I think infrastructure in the north is extremely important, and we cannot be letting people down when we've made promises like that. And I also think we need to be doing more funding that can be given at a very local level, so that there can be local decision making. And I think I'd go further than what Hamza is saying about second homes. And I think I would look to see if it's possible to give communities themselves the opportunity to ban any more second homes in their area if they think that that's the right thing for them. Oil and gas, we know that many communities, there are many well-paid jobs that are sustaining communities in the north through the money that they're getting from those jobs. So I was trying to say over the last week or so, that's really important to some of our communities in the north. So we need to make sure that when we're doing this transition from oil and gas into renewables, that we make sure that we're not stopping oil and gas, losing these well-paid jobs, skilled jobs in Scotland, and then importing oil from other countries, because that doesn't make any economic sense for us. But we do have a lot of opportunity in renewables. We are going to transition. Yesterday I was at FlowWave, so I was looking at wave and tidal technology, and obviously Scotland's leading in the innovation in this. So I think we've got a huge opportunity here to get in on the ground floor of this, do better than we did as part of the UK in terms of oil and gas, keep some of the money for the people of Scotland when we develop this new industry, and it can provide us not just with clean, cheap energy for the Highlands and for the rest of Scotland, but also an industry, new jobs, skilled jobs, high-paid jobs. So I think we can aim higher, and I think we can do better for the Highlands, but also for all of Scotland when we're working together.
Thank you. I'm conscious it happens after every first question. We've sort of answered all the questions. Now, let's try and condense it, because we want to get as many questions as possible. Now, I'm going to take that lady there with a hand up. Yep, on you go. Can you wait for the microphone to come to you? It's coming this side. And say who you are.
I'm Siri.
Well, there you are.
I'm not.
I don't even get paid for the advertising either, which is very sad. Okay, but this is not Siri, this is somebody else. On you go.
Yeah, it's not Siri. My name's Helen Wright, and I'm a member of Yes Nan. I'm an activist in that group. And I think it was Kate that mentioned lowering the voting age to 16, which was a fantastic move of the SNP, but I don't see many teenagers in the audience. So what are you going to do, each candidate to do, because those people are our future, right? They're Scotland's future. And I think, quite a few did vote at the referendum and at Scottish elections. But where are they as activists? And what does each candidate plan to do to speak to those people, young people, and include them in your future plans?
Thank you. We start with Hamza.
That's a great question. Thank you so much, Helen, for it. A few things. First of all, you're absolutely right. Why are we doing what we're doing? Why is it we believe in independence? We believe in it, of course, for the benefits that maybe I'll have for ourselves, but it's for our children. It's for my girls. It's for our grandchildren. It's for those generations that aren't even born yet. They are the ones, all of us, but they are the ones who will benefit from independence. And I think that's why, as much as we point out Westminster's failings, and it's right we do that, the way to win that sustained majority support for independence, which delivers us that independence, is to make sure that we are speaking about the priorities that matter to people and inspiring them to a vision to independence. And we have to inspire our 16 and 17-year-olds. We have to inspire our young people that things, can be better. I've got a 13-year-old daughter, and she has a fair bit of anxiety about the way the world is going and some of the culture wars that are being fought and her prospects and her opportunities. She's far more conscientious about these things than I was, but I was 13, right enough. But she worries about these things. So we've absolutely got to make sure we're engaging. So one way we do that is make sure we go to where young people are. Right? We don't expect them to come to us. We go to TikTok, we go to Instagram, but we also get out into the youth clubs. Absolutely. Oh, no, the real people are there. Don't get me wrong. Trust me, my stepdaughter spends far too much time on TikTok. But we also get out to the youth clubs too. We get out to where young people are. But actually, we make sure that through devolution, we're giving them an opportunity to see what we can do for them. And there's lots of good policies I could mention. I think, for example, the free concessionary travel for those that are under 22, a great initiative, one that shows, again, what we've managed to do with a limited budget. And the last thing I'll say, because I'm conscious of time, is our young people have come to us in droves because of the progressive, socially progressive agenda we've had for years. And we cannot roll back on that. We cannot roll back on that. I know people have accused me, even in the last 15, 20 minutes, of being continuity candidate. Well, I'll say this much. If it's about continuing the socially just, progressive agenda that has won us so much support from young people, then I will absolutely nail my colours to that mast. Because I believe that the young people of our country need to look their First Minister in the eye, and they need to believe that they share the same values that they do. And if they don't believe that, if they believe that they're going to roll back on their rights or the values that they hold dear, we will lose them from this movement. And if we lose them from this movement, then it will take forever to get our independence. So I will be that First Minister who will plant his flag in the ground and will say that we will continue that socially progressive, just Scotland, and not just with the powers of devolution, but hopefully with the powers of an independent nation.
Sure. Ash.
Thank you. Yeah, young people, absolutely. We need to be working on how we get them more involved. So obviously in the SNP we've got the YSI. So I think, there's different things I'm going to talk about here. So I think the YSI could be really useful in terms of getting younger people registered to vote. I think that's really key. There's some data on this that says that if you start voting, you're quite young, it becomes a habit, and then you just keep voting. It becomes an ingrained habit, and it's just something you do all the time. If you don't register to vote and then you don't vote until you get older, I think it's much more difficult to get into that habit. So I would like to see us really prioritizing that drive to get younger people registered so they can come out and then express their democratic will. I agree that young people obviously engage with the media and the news in totally different ways than we do. You know, when I was a girl, there was like 3 TV channels. I didn't have a mobile phone. There was no such thing as the internet. You guys will know exactly what I'm talking about if there's any people in the room that are around about the same age as me. But I've got sons. I've got twin sons, and they just turned 19, and they never ever watch the TV. You know, the TV's off, and they're sat on the sofa looking at this, watching TV programs, but on a tiny little screen. I don't think it makes any sense, but they seem to be into that. So there's obviously different ways of engaging with them and making content that can reach them specifically. And I think that's not beyond us to do that at all. If they're members of the party, though, I've set out a plan. I'd like people to go and have a look at this and see what you think of it. So I've set out an action plan for how we modernise the party, how we make it more transparent so that people can trust what's going on inside the party, so we can see how many members we've got and what sort of diversity we've got in the party. All of these things can be there. And also have a plan for how we get people more involved. We want people who are members of the SNP to know where to get involved, who to talk to, who to learn from, who they can give their skills to, who you can go to if you need something designed for a leaflet or whatever, things that we can use there. There's no reason why every single young person that comes into the SNP, we don't see them as a potential future First Minister. There's no reason why that couldn't be the case. And if they're part of the wider movement, so maybe they're not in the SNP, I think you said you were part of the Yes movement, they're part of the wider Yes movement as well, then we can get back to what we were doing during the independence referendum, which is what I was talking about earlier, where we had that movement that was very local to each individual area, because what works, up here is not necessarily going to be the same thing as what's going to work in Glasgow or in the borders of, So make it creative. We saw that a lot during the Yes campaign, that creativity. I think that's what will get young people involved, and making things fun, because that's what keeps all of us going, but I think the young people in particular. And that is what will get people involved and keep them involved.
Thank you.
Thanks. Well,
I am delighted to announce that I have 3 unpaid advisors in the form of 3 teenage girls who live in the house and tell me precisely what they think about everything. And, you know, our young people are hugely switched on politically. They are they're getting their news, they are debating issues, they have strong opinions, they're switched on. And they want to engage in political discussions. I see that whenever any of the friends come over for sleepovers, sitting around the dinner table, and they're wanting to talk about what's happening in the world, rather than some of the things that we might assume that they want to talk about. My first involvement with the SNP was through Young Scots for Independence. So I got involved with the Highland Young Scots for Independence. I remember the first time we went down to Glasgow to campaign, and what a shock to the system that was. It was a Glasgow East by-election, I think it was, in 2008. I jumped on board a bus from Inverness down the road. And our young people are engaged. And I think in terms of reaching them, we've got to be a government that delivers for them. Right? So political debate's important. But do you know what? Right now in the Highlands, young people can't find anywhere to live. Right now in the Highlands, young people are getting paid less, according to the minimum wage, than older people are, because the UK government has a split minimum wage. Right now in the Highlands, before we introduced the concessionary bus travel, which was a decision I made in a budget negotiation with the Greens a few years ago, because I believe in it, before that happened, they were using their first hour of wage to get the bus in, and they were using the last hour of wage to get the bus home. Where's the justice there? So as a government, political debate is important, absolutely, but we've got to deliver. We've got to deliver affordable homes, we've got to deliver a fair wage, and we've got to ensure that our infrastructure and our public transport works for our young people. Because here in the Highlands, we've got a challenge, which is our young people generally leave. And we want to keep them here. You know, they are our future. They are the future of the workforce. They are the future of our communities, and we've got to deliver for them. So I guess, coming back to where I started, and my 3 unpaid advisors, they want to know what a government's going to do for them. And I think as the SNP, we've got a really solid track record of delivering for our young people, but we could do more, and we've got to keep delivering for them.
Gentleman at the back holding a piece of paper.
Thanks, Mike. My question is on Scotland's energy and the need for a national energy authority with an equity stake in future energy developments. It was answered last night, so I'll ask it from a different but no less important perspective. Do our candidates agree that what we have in the UK is an approach to energy which is a major barrier to social and economic development and an impediment to the essential environmental changes we need to make to tackle climate change? And sorry, I should have said I'm Andy Kay from Wester Ross.
Thanks, Andy. We start with Ash.
I do agree with you. Anyone that watched last night, we talked a little bit about this. I have been arguing outside the party and then as an elected representative inside the party that we should be having a national energy company. I think it is not just one that's involved in supply, it needs to be involved in generation. We need to take a stake in the future of renewables for the people of Scotland so that we are getting the money from that and we keep that money in Scotland and not watch in despair as the money is draining out of Scotland to elsewhere, because it's just not good enough and we cannot allow that to happen again. So we need to rethink this. Obviously, we're constrained at the moment. We're a part of the UK. The UK has set up the current energy market. It is a mess. I mean, there's no other word for it. You will probably be aware that there are other European countries, France and Spain, you know, they have capped the increase at a few percent. They are not facing what we are facing here with it going up by 50% and then another 40%. This is an absolute outrage what's happening at the moment in the UK. It's like this huge transfer of wealth from, you know, normal people right up to the top of these corporations, and it is disgraceful. So I think we would have more ability to act on this if we're independent, and that's why I see that our future, it's imperative that we move to independence as soon as possible, because we are trapped in this messy situation that isn't doing anything for Scotland. It isn't, it's much more difficult for us to grow our renewables capability under the system that we're in at the moment, and we need to move on from it.
Absolutely. It's a disgrace, and I imagine we all agree on the fact it's a disgrace. But here in the Highlands, where we've got the plentiful supply of energy generation, we're the ones that are paying more than anywhere else in the UK. So that says it all. But for me, much has been made of the fact it was Scotland's oil and it's drained away with nothing to show for it. But when it comes to renewables, it's not just that it's Scotland's wind and rain and tidal, it's our communities' sources of energy. And this issue for me is all wrapped up in land reform, because we can see across the Highlands and Islands in particular, brilliant examples of where communities have been able to generate their own energy. So I'm going to give you an example in Morven, in the Ardmurchan Peninsula, where communities there have got together when it comes to renewable sources of energy that has created jobs, it's reduced their costs, and it's made them self-sustainable. And that, for me, is the advert for Scotland, that in a country which has got such a plentiful supply of energy, most small independent countries around the world would give their back teeth for just a tiny percentage of the energy potential that we have in Scotland. But the way that we unlock that and harness that must be around thinking about communities and local communities and not just thinking about the nation as a whole. I think the difficulty is, and obviously there were some answers last night, which were around how we help communities take stakes in energy and so on, so I won't go over that again. But we do absolutely need to see the grid in Scotland's hands, we need to see the sources of energy in Scotland's hands, and we need to see energy companies in Scotland's hands.
Thank you. The problem with going third is that they've all said all the good stuff, but let me just give you my sense of what I think we need to do. Three things. I agree, land reform, Andy, is absolutely key to this. It cannot be right that so much of our land, particularly in our Highlands, is in the hands of too few people. And those too few people are the ones who generate the profit from that land. So we've got to make sure, and if I'm certainly elected as First Minister, this year we have to introduce that land reform bill, going on the back of those recommendations from the Land Commission, but to be bold, to be radical, because let's be honest, we've not gone nearly as far as we should have done in relation to land reform as a government. So we've got to go further, and a bill would help absolutely with that. But these issues, whether it's peat restoration, whether it's renewables, absolutely have to be central to when it comes to the issue of land reform, because the profits from our land should be going back into the communities, like the communities here in the Highlands. And that's why I mentioned the second point, which is an equity stake. I think it's not just about leasing. I'm pleased at what was happening in relation to ScotWind, but I think what we have to do is make sure we take an equity stake. So when, of course, those renewables do generate profits, a portion of those profits comes back to be reinvested back in our communities, because again, it's your asset that has allowed those profits to be generated. And the third thing I would say is we have to ensure that we grasp the opportunity of green energy. 77,000 jobs potentially that can be created through the green energy sector. I think Scotland, the North East, yes, but Scotland as a whole should be the net zero capital, not just of Europe, but the net zero capital of the entire world. And when we do that, let's not make the mistakes those in Labour and Conservative made decades ago. Let's make sure we do, as Norway has done, that we have a fund where those profits are going into, and they can be used to withstand economic shock. They can be used so that when we have issues around pensions, when we have issues that are hurting and harming our economy, then that fund that we build up over time will help us to withstand some of those shocks. So for me, it's important that we ensure that if we are going to invest, and we are going to invest in renewables, particularly on the land here in the Highlands and our rural communities, that the profits go back into those very communities.
Thank you. I'm going to take the lady on this side there. There's two. Yes, I'll take the two, both actually. You first, and I'll come back to you in a minute.
Sorry, I just need to get rid of my crutches. I've written this down. My name is Valerie Ferguson Burns, and I'm from the Badenoch and Strathspey branch. An Ipsos poll of 27 countries in 2021 found that 15% of people in the UK identify as LGBTQI family members, and that the global average is 11%. Given being a member of that family as a proud bisexual woman I am, I can tell you it's not a choice. You either are or you're not. Using the global average of 11%, that means Scotland has roughly 599,500 members of the LGBTIQ family and citizens. The SNP has always been built on a cornerstone of equal rights. In Scotland, we understand persecution, given that we are treated as Westminster's literal red-headed stepchild with a fund. We understand intolerance, whether that intolerance is hidden behind any veil, be it religious doctrine or not. No one in Scotland should be punished, denigrated, abused, or more importantly, disenfranchised or treated any differently because of something not of their choosing. In the past week, many times I've heard comments from the candidates that then led to discussions within the independence movement. And some people have said to me, for example, that they disagree with some of the things the candidates have said, but that we should still not listen to those comments based on the idea that once we have independence, we can then make a fairer society. So I would like to ask, not just the candidates, but perhaps some of the people in the audience, if they really think it's fair that nearly 600,000 Scots be used as ethical triage for the independence movement.
Okay, we're not going to involve the audience in answering the questions. We're going to hear from the candidates. So we start with Kate.
I think you're right that fairness starts now. So to persuade people of independence, the decisions that we make now will either persuade them or not. And we have to assume that we are using all the powers that we have right now to start building a fairer country. And Scotland has come a long way. Scotland is a far more tolerant and fair society than it used to be. And I think that is what we need to continue to focus on. My position is that Scotland needs to be a place where tolerance is a ruling ethic, where differences are welcomed, where fairness is what matters and how we treat people really matters. And I think the SNP has led the way in demonstrating that and illustrating that. So that whether it comes to the Equality Act, no matter who you are, no matter what your sexual orientation is, no matter what your religion is, whoever you are, you feel like Scotland is your home and that you will have a leader that stands up, delivers and promises to protect your rights.
Ash?
Yes, I agree with you. We have to protect everyone's rights. We have to make everyone feel like they belong in Scotland, that they feel safe, they feel secure, that they're able to express themselves and live the life that they want to in peace and security. I think everyone would agree with that, and I'm certainly on board with that myself. I wasn't in the Scottish Parliament at the time that we had the equal marriage vote, but I'm on record saying that had I been there, I would have supported that. I'm a committed progressive. I did have issues with the gender reform bill, but that was because I felt that it was conflicting with human rights, and I was very clear that I was always going to protect the rights of women and girls. I think that can be redrafted, and I'm suggesting that that would go to a citizens' assembly for the public to look at the way forward on that, which I think does then protect trans rights. So I think everyone needs to be free to live their best life. And under me as First Minister, I am absolutely committed to making sure that everyone's human rights are protected and they're improved.
Thank you. Hamza?
You know, Valerie, I've lived my entire life in this country as a minority, and I've had to fight for my rights. And I know what it's like to have to fight for your rights. And I can give you an unequivocal and absolute guarantee that if I am First Minister and I lead us and I want to deliver us our independence, one of the first things we'll do, of course, is have that written constitution where people's equal rights are protected in law. And I just want to make a couple of other points, if I may. One is, we have gained so much support for our cause because of our progressive agenda. There's simply just no doubt about that. But why? We've not forced that down people's throats. It's because the majority of people share those values. And I think any regression, any hint of regression, then people will turn away from our movement. It goes back to Helen's question about 16 and 17-year-olds, but young people, where they are and their values. And whoever's First Minister of the three of us on this panel, if somebody is from an LGBT community, they need to be able to look at that First Minister in the eyes, and they need to believe that that individual isn't just going to tolerate them, but is going to celebrate them. And for me, that is at the crux and the heart of the issue, that we always talk about celebrating diversity. If we mean that, then it's not about tolerating. It's not just about protecting people's rights. It's about advancing people's rights. And for me, that is what I will do if I'm the First Minister of this country. That absolutely respect that people have a difference of opinion, have differing views. And we should, you know, I'm a Glaswegian at heart, in the best interest, in the best traditions of austere here, Rami, let's have that discussion and debate. But ultimately, they need to know that the leader of their country shares their values. And I have a track record, not just of supporting equal rights, and GRR, equal marriage, Justice Secretary that extended hate crime laws for the LGBT community. But if I'm First Minister, I will be unequivocal in my support for that socially progressive agenda that has won us so much support, and I believe that will win us our independence.
Thank you. I'm going to take that lady there, and then I'm going to take some of the questions from over this side, so don't despair. Particularly that gentleman there is beginning to look as if he's despairing. I'll take you next. Right.
Good afternoon. I'm Denise Stewart-Thompson from Inverness South Branch, speaking as an individual, and I am 1 in a million. There are over 1 million disabled Scots in our country, not including those of us that are debilitated by chronic ill health. And I wonder what assurances you can give that our voices will be heard, that our needs and wants will be incorporated within all governance, policy and planning. And will you commit to having future assemblies and conference as hybrid formats so that everybody can participate? I also noticed in Cumbernauld, and again here, there's no British Sign Language interpreter. That excludes so many people, and it would surely be good practice to have that as standard within all events. Thank you.
Thank you. We start with Hamza.
Yeah, look, I think there'll probably be similar answers right across to the table here. We need to do better for our disabled members, not just of our party, but actually those with disabilities right across the country. I've been involved in the National Care Service, as you'll know, and maybe we'll touch upon the detail of that later. But one of the things that Kevin Stewart, the minister who's leading that project, has made sure he reminds us every day of doing is listening to the voices of lived experience. In fact, every single policy in government should be informed and co-designed by lived experience. Not a consultation that just goes out and people respond to it and then we look at it and we analyse it. No, getting out into the communities, including in rural, remote Scotland, getting right into those communities and asking people what is going to change your life for the better. And we have a great asset in our party. I think all of us have said that we want to harness the talent. If I'm elected leader of the party, we've got phenomenal talent. We've got great talent in Westminster, we've got great talent in the Scottish Parliament, local government, but of course across our membership. And we have a disabled members group. I was just talking to a chap, Andy Jackson, yesterday when I was at yesterday's Hustings. Stefan Hogan as well was doing some great work as well in the north in Fife with the disabled members group. So as a party, Again, we're not there to have a disabled members group as a tick box. You should be informing us about, and we should be listening to you about what more we have to do. I think that's an excellent idea about a BSL interpreter. Obviously, party president hears what you said, and it'll be up to the party, but I would certainly endorse that having BSL interpreters at our hustings right across the country, because nobody should be excluded. And I would absolutely commit to future assemblies, conventions, national conferences, conference itself, that they are in hybrid format. I think it's an excellent idea. We did it out of necessity during the COVID lockdown, but I thought it was an excellent idea to keep going. So I absolutely agree with that. But I end where I started, which is you, our membership, are an asset to us, over 100,000. We've got to harness the talent of all of them, all of you, listen to you, and make sure that we adapt our policies to suit you.
Kate?
So I agree with Hamza, but just on that last line, I think that too often what we're doing is adapting afterwards rather than making things accessible by default. And that is the approach that we need to make. When we build a new hospital, accessible by default, you shouldn't have to fight for that. When we invest in transport, new buses, accessible by default, you shouldn't have to fight for that. When we build new housing, accessible by default, you shouldn't have to be fighting for that once your house has been built. So our whole policy approach needs to be accessible by default. And yet so often, even now, when I'm talking to constituents about whatever investment it is, they are still arguing for fairly basic accessibility issues that need to be accommodated. And I think the problem is that we don't listen to those with lived experiences up front as much as we should. And there is a certain irony, of course, in saying that, you know, we start by listening to those with lived experience if even within our members they feel that they can't take part, perhaps because there isn't that support. I think we have come a long way. I think there has been a lot more investment in terms of making things accessible by default, but we shouldn't be talking about it after it's done, because if we want to hear from you and we want you to help build the policy, as I want all our members to be building policy, then we need to start from a position of making it as accessible as possible. All of us, I imagine, will have within our close family or friends those with various forms of disabilities. Some of them are hidden, some of them are perhaps more obvious. And so we need to think about how we make all of our debates, our discussions, our policy formation accessible by default. And then as a government, every penny that we spend must be spent with a view to ensuring that it's accessible to all and not having to retrofit after it's done.
Thank you. Ash?
Yes, I agree with all of what my colleagues have said so far, so I won't just say the same thing, but in a slightly different way. But to add to that, though, I take your point about conference, and I actually did raise this with HQ. So I think it was when we were coming out of COVID, so it must have been 2020, and we were talking about going back to the normal format. And so I raised with HQ, and I said, well, are we making sure this is hybrid? Because I recognise, and it was raised with me at my branch level, that many people found that attending remotely worked much better for them. It was much more accessible for them. It's also cheaper for some people as well. You don't have the travelling, you don't have to stay over. So it makes it much more accessible. So I promise I'll keep up the pressure on that. Having raised it a couple of years ago, I'll keep going. In my constituency, I've also been working with, I think it's called something like I'm talking about Waverley train station here, so forgive me. But I'm sure there might be similar issues elsewhere in the country. The Access Committee there. And I've been trying to work with them to speak to the management of the train station and Network Rail as well about the completely inaccessible way that station is being run. And so for people with disabilities, people that are blind, people that are in wheelchairs, they're basically being excluded from train travel because they can't, they can't get on the trains, or they need help. The help's not available. They're booking help. The help doesn't turn up. They can't get off the train. I don't know if anybody remembers that Tanny Gray-Thompson, because she made a big point to this about the media, that she was missing stops. She couldn't get off the train because the help that she booked didn't turn up. So we're really excluding people from basic rights like being able to travel on our train system, and it is not acceptable. So you're absolutely right. We need to do much better.
Thank you. Gentleman here, right in the middle. Can we get a microphone to him? Thank you.
Thank you. Kenny McKinnon, Wick Branch. Would any of the panel consider dissolving Parliament at the moment and holding a Scottish general election this year?
Thank you. Straightforward question. Almost a yes and no question, but perhaps a little bit more. So can we start with Ash?
Thank you. So my plan for the way we get out of the situation that we're in right now is that we're in a position where we are just doing more of the same all the time. So we are piling up mandates, and I'm afraid to say that this is what both my colleagues are suggesting right now. Their plan is a bit like giving you a bag of marshmallows. So it looks quite nice, it sounds quite nice, but ultimately there's absolutely no substance to it whatsoever. We cannot keep begging Westminster for a mandate in order to hold a referendum, right? And the reason for that is that the referendum it's not the gold standard. The gold standard in this situation is actually the ballot box. So what the UK government are trying to do is they're trying to prevent Scotland from expressing its will. That's all they're trying to do. So they're just trying to say, no, you can't have it, you can't express their will. So what we need to do on that is we need to accept that they're not going to give us a referendum. They're not going to give us a referendum. It doesn't matter how many times we win more elections and we pile up more mandates, they're going to say no. And the reason that we also know that is that Nicola Sturgeon made sure of that because we've had the decision from the court. So we know we're not going to get that. So what we need to do now is we need to use the gold standard. And this is recognised internationally, and that is the ballot box. So we go into each and every election, and we make it very clear to the people of Scotland what they're voting for, that they are voting for the Edinburgh government and the Westminster government to start negotiations. It's very clear to everybody, both inside Scotland, in the UK, and then internationally. And then when they do that, when the Scottish people take that power back, and they tell us when it's time by voting for it, the 50% trigger, and I'll be clear, I hope it's a lot higher than that. I'm not hoping that it's 50% plus one. I want it to be much higher than that, but I'm just setting that out as the majority position of 50%. International law is pragmatic. It's law, it's the law. It is what it is. So there's no question of the UK government not coming to the negotiating table. They will come to the negotiating table when Scotland's will is expressed through the ballot box, and that democratic instruction from Scotland will then be recognised by the international community. So I propose we take control of this process ourselves. We stop begging, please give us a referendum, give us one more chance. Because I think we've got to be realistic. We've got to look at the situation that we're in right now, and we've got to see how we can get out of that. And under my plan, we'll give that right back to the people of Scotland, because they are the people that will decide this for us, and they are the ones that will tell us when it's time for independence.
Hamza.
I quite like marshmallows, I won't lie. But look, and I think it's, that doesn't deserve an applause, people, come on. Look, for me, a couple of things. Kenny, I'm hungry for it. I'm impatient for it. Look, I'm a son of this party. My dad joined in '74. It tells me he was the first Asian member in Glasgow to join. I'm not sure if that's ever been verified, but he certainly joined in the 1970s, and I love this party. Whether I win or not, you're stuck with me, I'm afraid. I'm going to be in this party time and time again with you on the front line until we get our independence. So I get why we're all impatient, because I'm frankly bloody impatient for independence too. But let me also say very clearly, there's not a ruse, right? There's not a shortcut. Trust me, if there was, then probably the most formidable politician on these islands, Nicola Sturgeon, would have figured it out by now. Because she is by far, I have to say, the most intelligent person and politician I've ever worked with in my time. I think this idea that if we get 50% plus one, then we can demand negotiations and instruct the UK government to march up the road to Edinburgh, I don't think that works. I've been in government for over 10 years. When there's been a crisis and the need to get the UK government on the telephone, it's been hard enough, let alone getting them to come up the road to Edinburgh to begin negotiations and discussions. So I think we've got to be really honest with our membership. And my view, and I've believed this for a long time, is the way you get independence, and we'll talk about the route in a minute, but we have to not get stuck where our opponents want us, is this quagmire of process. Actually, we should be talking about why we need independence in this country. We do that, we get a sustained majority for independence. We get a sustained majority for independence, not 51% one day, 49 another, 52, 45, no. We get a sustained majority for independence. Independence becomes the political inevitability because there's nobody that can stand up against that tsunami of popular support that comes. Now, when it comes to the process itself, I believe that no option that's within a legal framework, including the option you've just raised, should be off the table. Every option should absolutely be on the table. And I'll empower within the first week our membership with those regional assemblies to have that discussion, not in a one-off special conference where we drag you all to Edinburgh and you've got to have a discussion there. No. In your regions, including up here, of course, in the Highlands, have those discussions. And it's the leadership who then has to act on your collective mandate once we have that discussion. But be in no doubt, Kenny, every single election, if I am leader, and I'm pretty sure it'll be the same for my colleagues, every single election must be fought on the issue of independence, bar none. And if we do that in the next general election, which has to be fought on the issue of independence, we must demand our powers over Section 30. We must also demand the repeal of Section 35, which is the most undemocratic use of the power. And then we must demand powers over things like fair work so that we can ensure that we can do more with devolution. So within, I think now, we have to strategize to put our opponents in the back foot and say, really, if you really believe in respecting devolution, if you really believe in that, then commit now in the next general election. If we win that election, and we will win that election, if we send a significant quota of SNP MPs down to Westminster, that you give us those powers over a legal referendum. And the more and more Westminster deny our democracy, the greater our support for independence.
Kate.
I think there's a danger that sometimes we've become the referendum party rather than the independence party. And if I think to the first few years of independence, having secured independence, being able to use the full powers of independence, that is the point that I want to get to, rather than just to get to another referendum. And in terms of the mission that we have ahead of us, you know, I am disappointed that the polls have not shifted as substantially as I think they should have, as Westminster has eroded devolution, as we've lived through a cost of living crisis, lived through Brexit. To me, the facts speak for themselves. And yet, we need to still persuade more of our friends and relatives to vote for independence. And I think we can do that. I'm ambitious. I have full confidence in the case for independence. I think the case for independence speaks for itself, but we need to ensure that our economy is prospering, we're dealing with poverty, we're reinvesting in our public services as a political act to continue to persuade people, but we also need to sketch out what those first few years of independence will look like. They've got to be able to see it. They've got to be able to feel it. Independence is not an abstract constitutional term, something out there that makes no difference to you. It is the difference to you struggling to pay your energy bills. It will make the difference to whether or not a quarter of kids live in poverty. It's real. And the approach I set out at the beginning is taking that on the head, sketching out from day one, if elected leader, sketching out what the first 10 years will look like with independence, how we can be fairer, how we can be wealthier, how we can be greener as a country so that people can see it and be persuaded. And that, yes, process is important, and I will make a comment about process in a minute. But I have full confidence in the case for independence. I think making that case for independence matters. We need to deal with the difficult issues. I think most of them revolve around the economy, so who better than an economy and finance secretary to go out and make the case and to persuade people of the value of independence. But we need to make that case. One little comment about process, because I think process takes care of itself once you see the dial shifting on independence as substantially as I think it can do. In terms of process, it's a case of focusing on the next election. 2024. We've got just over a year. That's the next focus. That's the next hurdle when it comes to putting independence front and centre of that ballot box. Now, I think people will also want to talk about cost of living, and that's right and important, because the answer to cost of living is putting energy in Scotland's hands. People will also want to talk about our NHS and public services, and that's okay, because one of the means to ensuring that we can grow the tax base and ensure we've got the revenue to reinvest is through independence. But independence needs to be front and centre of that, and I think the process will take care of itself once that dial shifts. All of us are persuaded of independence. All of us are. My question to you is, who's going to persuade those that are not yet persuaded of the merits of independence? Who does the opposition fear? Who can take the fight? Who can take the debate? Who can take the argument to the people and win through gentle persuasion? That's the question you need to be asking when it comes to which leader we should elect.
Okay, we're getting very close to the end now, and there's lots of people who still want to ask a question. So there's a hand up right at the back beyond that barrier thing that I'm going to take as the next question, and then we'll have time for one more.
Thank you. John Henderson, Aviemore. My question concerns maximising support for independence throughout Scotland, in this case particularly the Northern Isles and Borders, who may see that a government in Edinburgh not being remote and not a great advantage over one in Westminster. And I note with approval that Kate talked recently about decentralising care services. And she's also talked about setting out what a future Scotland government would be like. My question is, what would they think about having a modern Scandinavian type of government, which is much more decentralised than we have, much more regional power, and puts much more power in the hands of the people who feel close to it? Thank you.
Thank you. Decentralisation. Kate first.
Thanks very much. Well, let's start by breaking up Highland Council. You heard it here first. So, we know in the Highlands and Islands that the approach to social care, as you've mentioned, the approach to local government, the approach to fill in the potholes is going to look different in Portree than it does in Inverness. And we need to get back to what we were all about as a party, which was empowering those in local communities to make the best decisions for the people that they serve. That's my approach to independence. You know, my approach to independence is not rocket science. It is that those who live in Scotland are best placed to make decisions about affairs that matter to Scotland. And I think that that needs to be the approach that we take to power more generally. So, you know, we need a more empowered local government. We need to decentralise power further, but we need real empowerment. We can't just look at bureaucratic systems and say, right, we've given Highland Council all these powers, and then it stays there. It's about getting right out to the front line. So it's our doctors and our nurses that are feeding back about what they want to see change with the NHS. It's our carers that are saying this is what we need to see with social care. And it's those ultimately on the front line that can make the difference. You know, you mentioned Scandinavia. Scandinavian countries can do it. And my approach here is to say that we really need to have a serious conversation about how to decentralise power further to local government, taking away ring fencing, taking away the diktat, and ensuring that they can make the decisions. But that's not enough, because Highland Council's massive. And actually, it needs to be our councillors and our teams on the ground in these localities that have real, genuine power, not paper power, real power to make a difference. And we might see more potholes filled as a result.
Okay. Hamza?
You know, for me, we can't just talk the talk. We've got to walk the walk. And our ambition for independence is to put the power back into people's hands. And when it comes to our public bodies, I've got something else to say on that maybe in the next few days. When it comes to our public bodies, I think we've got to make sure that we are devolving them to our local communities. And I can't think of a better one to start with than than public bodies like CalMac, for example. They should be decentralised in the hearts of our community. And on their boards should be people who make up those communities, who live in those communities, who reside in those communities, who depend on those lifeline services in our communities. So I think organisations, public bodies, companies like CalMac, and there's many others as well, we need to make sure that they are representative of our communities. So when it comes to public bodies, the creation of them, don't just stick their offices in Edinburgh and Glasgow. Make sure that their offices, make sure the centre of their power, their headquarters, are in the communities that are being affected by them. So I would absolutely commit to doing that. I also believe that we need a new deal, not just for local government, because local government, of course, plays an important part. But when I go, for example, I think we've got some members from the Western Isles. When I was in Barra not too long ago, they were telling me they felt Stornoway was just as remote to them as Edinburgh or even London. So we've got to make sure we get out to community councils who do a phenomenal job. Our councillors who are in the audience today probably go to those community councils week on week and week, and they are doing phenomenal work. So let's not just put the resource into local authorities. Let's get it out into our community councils who are helping people on the ground day in and day out. And my deal for local government will be about empowering our local authorities, looking at funding mechanisms, looking at the ring fencing that exists at the moment and where that can be loosened up. Because we've got to trust our colleagues, not just at local government level, as I say, at community council level, to make the best decisions for the people that they represent.
Ash.
Yes, so you mentioned the borders in your question. I actually live in the borders, so I represent Edinburgh, but I live in the borders. I've lived there for nearly 20 years. So I very much understand that feeling of that people don't quite understand outside of the central belt what it's like to live in a rural area. So I totally hear you on that. And I won't rehearse what my colleagues have said here, but I also completely agree that we need to do more on decentralisation and we need to improve local decision making. But the thing with local decision making is we have to back it up with the funds. There's no point, you can't make much decisions about anything if you haven't got any money to back it up and to do things differently. So we need to find ways of generating funding that can go straight in at a very local level so that people can spend the money on the things that are important. So, councils have been doing things like, and they're doing this in Edinburgh. I've got Portobello Beach in my constituency. Obviously, it's a big tourist attraction. And they closed all the toilets. So you can imagine what that was causing problems. And I know that they've been doing that up here as well in some areas. So we've got to find a way to fund that properly so that we can make sure that we've got the services that we all need. And we need to have policies that will appeal. So we need to have policies that will appeal to the islands. And I think getting to grips with the ferry situation would be a very good start to that one. Improve our roads. And in the borders, I'd like to see us extend the Borders Railway line. It's been very successful, but it needs to go further. It can go down and connect up with the rail line further south. I agree with Kate. I think we should be looking at breaking up Highland Council. I think that's a very good idea. It's clearly, enormously large, and it means that people don't feel connection in the way the decisions are made. But in terms of independence, what we need to do is we need to build confidence with the public that we're getting ready for independence. And the way that we do that is we'll go back to this idea of the National Commission. So that National Commission is going to put everything into place that we need to get ready for independence. So that's things like job descriptions, recruitment strategies for the head of the central bank, planning, preparing for the independent currency of Scotland, and doing all of this. And while they're doing that, we will be reporting back to the Scottish public so they can see that not just we're talking about it, but they can see that we're actually getting ready for independence. And that will, I believe, neutralise a lot of the arguments that we had on things in 2014, because there won't be a discussion about those type of things because they can see we'll already be ready for it. The infrastructure for independence will be there and it'll be ready to go. Then through the National Convention, that's the wider movement, we'll bring everyone together, we can all work together, because we're not going to get anywhere if we're all working against each other and fighting. We've got to all work together across the movement. And we'll co-design that effective campaign with the movement. So that kind of moves the independence campaigning out into civil society, because it's conversations with people, with other people and their families and their friends that is going to move people along that dial to getting us to independence. And then when we're ready for that, then we have the voter empowerment mechanism, which I've set out to you, which means that each and every election, we will use the gold standard of the ballot box. And when Scotland is ready for independence and they have the confidence for it, which they will because they'll see us getting ready for independence. So if you pick me to be your leader, we have a plan to get to independence, and we will also be getting the country independence ready.
Thank you. I'm going to take one final question, and this gentleman has been very persistent and keeps trying to catch my eye, so he's caught it. Final question, please, and briefly, because we're running out of time.
I don't think I'll need a microphone.
Yes, you will, because it's for the live streaming.
Okay, is it working?
Yes, it's working. Can you just ask the question?
Right. My name is Peter Williamson. I'm the membership secretary for the Inverness, Loch Ness branch of the SNP. Hold it up here. Right, okay, got you now. The question is quite simple. It's are you ready for the television hustings? Because you're getting into bed with your mortal enemies, and these people will disfigure your narrative, disfigure your personal lives, disfigure everything else you have to say about the SNP, and they're out to make the SNP unelectable in Scotland, and that's what they will attack you with. And the other last thing I would say is, Ash is absolutely right about the polls. They're meaningless. The only thing that counts is an X in a box. And we have a national newspaper, and we have 2 columnists in it who have never voted for the SNP in their entire life, and they didn't put an X in a box for independence either. And that's Mr. McKenna and Mr. Hassan. So the only box that counts is in the election booth, X. That's it for me. Right.
Thank you. I think you sort of broke about 3/4 of the rules there, but never mind. You didn't break them all, so that's great. Can we now please have Ash, and then Humza, and then Kate, and they can also include in this their closing statements, as long as they're brief.
Yeah, Peter, I agree with you there. And I think that we all know we've got a fairly hostile media. And I don't say hostile, I mean, I think they're all terrible people. Yeah. I think they're doing their job. And obviously, none of, we've got the national newspaper now, but in 2014, we didn't even have that. So I think we had the Herald on Sunday, didn't we? That was the only paper, and that came out quite late towards the end. So we had a media that was entirely unionist in its outlook and was promoting the unionist line. And that's obviously a situation it's a very challenging situation in which to get out your message. So you're quite right about that. And I think, I mentioned this last night, but I think we need to maybe take a look at the way other countries are doing this. And Catalonia, I believe they have 4 pro-independence TV stations. So I'm wondering if that's something that we need to be looking at so that we can get our message out there. And you asked us if we're ready for the TV hustings. I think it is going to be challenging, and I think that my fellow candidates would no doubt agree that it's only very brave people that put themselves forward for this level of scrutiny. And you'll have seen me getting caught by the press in the first week. I'll be quite upfront with you. I had no experience of that level of intense scrutiny, where the media are kind of shoving cameras in your face and trying to get you to, say something that they can make a story out of. But you certainly learn to deal with it with practice. So I think all of us we're sort of feeling our way here. We'll get to the TV debate. But the other thing is, I think the country have an interest in this. So obviously at the moment, this is a closed hustings for the SNP members, which is quite right. We need to be able to talk about some of the problems we've got in the party and how we're going to address that, and that's appropriate. But I think we have to remember that this job is for party leader and First Minister, and the country has a very legitimate interest in who is the type of person that's going to become the First Minister of Scotland. So I think that's one of the things that we need to remember. Obviously, we're totally focused on independence, but we have to remember that the person that we pick to be leader is going to become the First Minister, and that person needs to be able to carry the country. That person needs to embody the values of our party. So you need to think about that when you're casting your vote. And so my offer to you is that I have a plan for independence. It's very clear, it's very simple and straightforward. I am uniting the wider movement behind me, and I am committing to you now that if I become leader straight away, I will start putting the infrastructure into place to ready Scotland for independence. Thank you.
Humza.
Peter, in the last couple of weeks, I've had people saying to me, you look all right when you smile. You should smile more. I've been saying to them, I've been health secretary for 1.5 years. You try smiling, because it's been exceptionally challenging and difficult. Look, for me, and I said this yesterday, some sections of the media, so I won't say all of the media, sections of the media will be doing their best to drive a wedge between all of us and drive a wedge in our party. And I'll give you an absolute commitment from my behalf. I'm in it to win it, and I'm hoping that I am elected as our next leader and our next First Minister. But whoever it is, It's so important our party unites behind the individual to get us our independence for our country. And we cannot allow some sections of the media to divide us, because they will do their damn best. I remember being at the first Hustings. Very good, much like this, well-natured, respectful in tone. And then I read some of the headlines about it, and it just didn't look like anything that I recognised. But second to that is that we've got to make sure that we are countering some of that disinformation quickly. So I want to ensure that we have a rebuttal unit in our headquarters, and I'll come back to headquarters in a minute, that is not one or two people, but a real beefed up unit that is not sending out a press release a day later or a couple of days later or a letter to the Herald. No, it is getting that rebuttal out within minutes to counter some of that disinformation. That will help. But actually, the people who are going to counter the disinformation are you, because we're going to win our independence doorstep by doorstep, persuading people, looking them the whites in of their eyes and saying this is why we need independence. And in order to do that, we have a whole bunch of prospectus papers on the economy and so on and so forth. We need to get that into bite-sized chunks, not big prospectuses that you can't spend on a doorstep 5 hours talking to somebody about the economic case, but the bite-sized chunks so we arm you with the information you need. And that's, again, where headquarters, who, our staff here have done a brilliant job in headquarters in arranging these hustings, but we need internal headquarter reform so that headquarters working for branches right up and down the country. And the last thing I'll say, and I kind of summing up, I won't give you the whole pitch, we've done that when we were standing here, is that the next leader of the SNP, the next leader of the country, the person who's going to deliver independence, is somebody that not just has experience, because that is important, it's got to be somebody that can not only unite our movement, that is important, it's fundamentally, at its core, got to be somebody who can grow support for our movement. Somebody who embodies the values of the country, but is able to build on that real progressive agenda that's got us so far. And I hope that I've been able to demonstrate that I've got those skills in the last couple of weeks. I'll keep doing it for the next few weeks. But be in no doubt whatsoever that not only do I believe in independence with every fibre of my being, I will work day and night to ensure that we deliver our independence, because our country, our people, our children, they deserve nothing less.
Kate.
I've thoroughly enjoyed each of the hustings that we've done so far. This is the third husting. And you'll never guess what? We're all pals. And do you know what else? You're all part of that same SNP family that we are part of. I know that because I've campaigned with many of you. We've campaigned in the rain, we've campaigned when it's cold, we've campaigned when people shouted at us, and we've done it together because we've been in the bunker together, because we all believe in the same goal, which is independence for Scotland and nothing less. And whatever anybody writes about this debate, whatever anybody does to characterise this debate, it's friends debating amongst friends how we get that result. And often people confuse unity for uniformity. Uniformity is not what we want, because we want debate. We need disagreement. If we're serious about this, we know that the SNP needs to reflect the diversity of the Scottish people, with different backgrounds, different stories, different approaches to life. That uniformity is not what we need, but we do need unity. And ultimately, what we're all going to unite behind is the fact that decisions about Scotland's future should be taken by the people of Scotland. And if we keep that as our sole aim and our sole goal, then I have huge confidence that no matter what happens in this leadership contest, we're going to emerge from this stronger, and we're going to emerge from this still friends and still family. But for me, the bottom line when it comes to the contest is, who do you think has the potential not just to believe in independence, because we all believe in independence, but who's got the track record and who's got the competence and who's got the plan to actually deliver it? And the other question you need to ask yourself is this: who do the opposition fear the most? Because the way we're going to shift the dial on independence is by persuading those who are not yet persuaded. We know that the economy is one of the fault lines. We know it's where we need to make the case, that we need to persuade people. And all of us have a job to do in reaching out. It starts with our members, but that's also got to be set from the top. At the end of the day, if we keep doing the same things, we're going to get the same results. So we need change. Continuity won't cut it. We need a candidate, we need a leader with competence, with a track record of delivery, that can speak to people, can reach out, so that we see, ultimately, as Peter said, irrespective of what the polls say, when it comes to that poll, that key poll, we're not going to be waking up the next morning, as Ash so eloquently portrayed it in her comments. We're not going to be waking up the next morning in grief. We're going to be waking up the next morning on the first day of an independent Scotland.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Can I just close this off by making a couple of points? First of all, you've heard the candidates. You will make your choice. The voting papers go out a week on Monday, either by email or, for those who don't have email, by post. And they have to be returned by the 27th, and the result will be announced, we hope, on the 27th. Secondly, there are a range of hustings. If you haven't had quite your fill for a Saturday afternoon, then there are a range of other hustings you can go to. There's one in Dumfries, one in Johnson, one in Edinburgh, one in Glasgow, one in Aberdeen. Those are the party ones. And there are 3 televised hustings and an STUC hustings. Glad to be able to say, and I've been able to check while we've been having this meeting, BSL is actually on the live stream now, and that we will add BSL interpreters if there is a demand for it. I only make that point because we've said that repeatedly, but if anybody's planning to come to Hustings or anybody knows anybody who is, then please ask us and we'll provide that. The final point I want to make is to say thank you. To say thank you as an audience. Some of you have got the answers you wanted. Some of you asked questions not wanting the answers, and some of you didn't get the answers you wanted. But whatever happened, you've been a great audience, and you've proved something to the people who have been watching at home and throughout the world. In actual fact, people can watch this online, which is that the SNP is positive, dynamic, inspirational, and intends to win independence. And that has been absolutely clear from this discussion and from your candidates. Please thank your candidates too.
God, I don't think that reminder about the TV debates.